out how much is this going to cost? How am I going to pay for it? And what's out there to help? And as a goal, and as a parent who put two young men through college, we want to get them through their education owing as little money as possible. So I'm not going to put too much pressure on our presenter tonight, but he's going to tell you every magic trick known to man that will help you access what is available to you and how to do so. So I want to also explain how this evening is going to flow. In non-2020 year, we would all be in an auditorium and looking at each other and interacting, and we would be able to see your smiling faces. You can see us, but right now we cannot see you. When you registered, you received a link to a Google document to write questions in. We're going to reserve a portion of time to answer as many of these questions as we can, and also provide you with some resources after the presentation is over. Financial aid is scary, intimidating, and yet survivable. And one of the things that makes it survivable is having someone who is an expert. Your students, your scholars, school counselor, we're what we would call a generalist. We understand an overview of the financial aid process. We can even tell you what FAFSA stands for. But we're not the specialists that can answer some of the more detailed questions that may be unique to you and your family and its circumstances. And as you may hear this evening, there are many, many unique circumstances that play a role and impact the process of applying for financial aid. So this presentation is being brought to you by the New Brigham Large City School District Department of Counseling and Guidance. And it is with great pleasure that I introduce to you Mr. Raymond Torres, the Associate Director of Financial Aid for SUNY Orange. Mr. Torres.
Hello, thank you so much, Mr. Katz. Oh, thank you for the applause. I appreciate that. So yes, everyone, welcome. I'm very happy and grateful and humbly grateful to be able to talk to you today regarding financial aid, how to navigate the funding for college. Because as you know, especially in COVID time, it's not only about getting into a school of higher learning, it's about how are you going to pay for it. So I'm going to be going over a lot of general information for you, and we will touch base with some, more detailed stuff as well. I do ask that if you do put any questions in the Google Doc, we will read them off after. I will answer them, but please do not put your personal name or any person identifiable information in that doc. We are not able to, we don't want to be able to know your situation in a group setting, but we want you to have an open dialogue with not only the financial aid office, but with your counselors as well. But that should be reserved for a one-on-one conversation, not in a group setting, because as I always say, not everyone needs to know your business. So without further delay, I'm going to share my screen so we can go over the wonderful world of financial aid. But while I'm starting, I have to make the quick joke of don't wig out. Financial aid is not that hard. And I have props with me. I have my wig shop that you're in right now. I'm a former hair and makeup designer, so I still build wigs on the side. So if you feel stressed, just think these are former students of mine. They all turned to stone and now I'm ripping their hair out. They gave it to me when they were done with financial aid. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Alrighty, it should be presenting. If you have any issues or you're not able to hear me or understand me, if it gets garbled, please put it in the chat or let one of the administrators know so we can make sure everyone's getting a clear, uniform presentation today. So again, to start off, I am Raymond Torres. I am the Associate Director of Financial Aid at SUNY Orange. I've been in higher education for 10 years. It seems longer, but especially during COVID time. But I'm, again, very humbly honored to be here with you today to present the wonderful world of financial aid. So according to the National Association for College Admission Counseling, more than half of all students attending a school in the United States receive some form of financial aid. This is in the form of state and institutional or even federal grants, federal loans, private loans with an outside company, parents, if you are maybe taking out a Parent Plus loan for your child to help supplement their bill. Those are all considered financial aid. And later on in the presentation, we'll go over the differences between types of aid, such as what's a scholarship, what is a grant, what are loans. So we always want you to have an open dialogue with your financial aid office. And here at SUNY Orange, even if you don't choose to go to our school, please feel free to ask questions from this presentation to us. We are more than happy to answer questions. And in addition, I'm also going to give you another link to the Federal Student Aid Information Center, which is the main FAFSA help center that will help you file your free application for federal student aid. So that's a good segue into my first slide, the free application for federal student aid. In order for a school to determine your aid eligibility, you have to file your free application for federal student aid, otherwise known as the FAFSA. Now, the FAFSA, as I said, for federal, becomes available the October before a new academic year. So, for example, say you're a senior this year and you plan on going to college fall of next year, so say August of 2021. Well, the FAFSA for that academic year was available October 1st of 2020. Now, if you're a student maybe looking to go, maybe you're a junior and you're looking to attend in fall of 2022, then your FAFSA will be available October 1st of 2021. The best way to ever remember that is always say the FAFSA is available the October before the fall start of the academic year. Very simple. I know everyone can remember that. In addition, the earlier you file, the better opportunity and chance you may have for some aid with your institution. So, for example, a lot of schools have priority deadlines. When the FAFSA becomes available, some schools may say, if you want to be considered for an institutional fund, you need to have your FAFSA completed by November 1st or January 1st. Some have institutional deadlines just for packaging aid, which new students, it may be January 1st, but returning students may be March 1st. It's always a great idea to check your college websites for priority deadlines. I know on our financial aid website, SUNY.Orange.edu/financial aid, we do have some priority deadlines. So if you're looking to come to SUNY Orange starting maybe fall of next year, you want to check out what those deadlines are. Now, on the free application for federal student aid, the tax information that they're going to be looking at that you must enter would be from 2 years prior. So they call this prior year. So most parents, or even maybe you're a student who has an older sibling who went to college years ago, may remember that the FAFSA used to ask for tax data from the previous year. Well, a few years ago, they changed it, and they said it's easier now for families to enter data from 2 years prior. So they did change that, and now it's called prior year. So, for example, if you are a student who's looking to attend next year, 2021, 2022, you're going to be looking at 2 years prior. So you're going to be using the 2019 tax information. But say you're a senior who's graduating early, say you're leaving in December and you want to start college in the spring. We are currently in the 2020-2021 academic year. So therefore, if I'm looking at 2 years prior, I'm going to be entering 2018 tax data on the FAFSA. So always remember that FAFSA asks for tax information from 2 years prior, and it's always available to October before the start of a fall academic year. Now, even before you file your free application for federal student aid, you want to make sure you create an FSA ID. Now, the Federal Student Aid ID is, I'm just going to read it right off the screen because it is what it is. It's a username and password that gives you access to the Federal Student Aid online systems and also serves as your legal signature for federal documents. Now, when you're filing your FAFSA, you're going to have to sign it. So instead of physically printing it off, signing it, and mailing it to the processing center, you can use your FSAID in order to sign your FAFSA, and that will get submitted to the Department of Education and Federal Student Aid to calculate information, which we'll go over on the FAFSA on what's calculated and what it means by an EFC, or expected estimated family contribution. Now, some families remember that back in the day, you used to have to mail away, you put in the information and they mail you a federal PIN. So they did get rid of the federal PIN. So you want to make sure you create an FSAID. You can create an FSAID now. Even being a junior or senior, you should definitely have this done. You can go to the FSAID.ED.GOV and you can create your PIN. Please make sure when you're creating your PIN, it's going to ask you for some identifiers, such as your social security number, your date of birth, your address. It's going to have you put in an email address. Make sure when you're doing it, you actually have your social security card. And so I have to stress, and having your birth certificate, because I have a lot of students and families who will enter maybe a parent's social as a student, or they'll do the vice versa. They'll do the student social as a parent. Make sure you're entering the information exactly as it appears on your social security card and on your birth certificate. Now, if you are considered a dependent student by the standards of federal student aid, your parent will have to put their information on the FAFSA. So parent, you will need to create an FSAID. But if you are considered independent by federal student aid standards, then the parent would not have to enter their information. And we're going to go over some of those differences a little later in the presentation. So a website you want to get very, very familiar with is SUNY.gov. Not only does this website house your free application for federal student aid, but also when you are awarded aid, there are going to be some requirements in order to secure that aid before it disperses to your account. And those requirements are completed on this website. But for the sake of just talking about the FAFSA, this is a website where you would actually do your free application for federal student aid. So if you are new to the process, after you create your FSAID, you can go to this website, and under Apply for Aid is where it will give you information about the FAFSA, but it'll also give you a link where you can actually go into the FAFSA application. If you are a new user, you click Start for the new user. If you are maybe a transfer student, or you have maybe someone in your family, or maybe further down the line, you start at one school and you're going to transfer to another, but you've already completed a FAFSA and you want to return, do something more to it, or maybe add a school to your FAFSA, you would click Returning User. Now, on this website is when you're doing your application, you could add additional colleges. So every school has a what's called a federal OPEID, or federal school code. You can get them 99.999% of the time. They're on your college of choice website, and you can add them to the FAFSA. You can also check the status of your FAFSA if it's processing. If you need to make corrections, maybe you made an error. Maybe you forgot to include a sibling that's in your household. You can go back and make a correction. Also, when your FAFSA is processed, you will get what's called a student aid report. Now, this is not your financial aid package that you'll get from the school. The student aid report will just give you kind of a breakdown of everything you listed on the FAFSA. If there are any things that you need to know ahead of time, like maybe you are a student at one point and then went to another school and you used loans there, it will kind of give you what your borrowing habits have been. It will also give you a number, which is called the EFC, or the expected family contribution. Now, in the upper right-hand corner, if you can see on my screen, there is a way to toggle between English and Spanish. And there are other sections of the website where you can actually do it in different languages. They're working very hard. FSA is working very hard to transmit everything on their website to various languages. And unfortunately, I am Hispanic, but I do not speak Spanish, so I'm unable to answer questions that are in Spanish. But I know that I can contact the Federal Student Aid Information Center and get a Spanish-speaking representative on the phone, and they will go over everything. The other day, I had a student who was Dutch, and we called up, and they had a representative that they can get in touch with who actually spoke their language. So I think that's a very fantastic, and helpful to the student. So once you're filing your FAFSA, there's a little trick that's going to help you. And this is called the IRS Data Retrieval Tool. Now, the IRS Data Retrieval Tool links your FAFSA with IRS information. So as I stated earlier, when you're filing your FAFSA, you're going to input tax information from 2 years prior. Well, this tool will allow you to automatically transfer that data from the IRS to the FAFSA. So this way you don't have to search for your 1040s or your W-2s or maybe any schedules you may have. It will allow you to link that and transfer it right over. The key thing is, and we'll talk about a little more in just a little bit, certain ways that you won't be able to use the data retrieval tool, but that's okay if you can't use it. You just need a copy of your 1040 looking at your tax return and enter the data as you're going through the application. Now, as I stated again, for the 2021-2022, the FAFSA will use the 2019 IRS tax information. And if you're a student looking to go in 2022-2023, they would use the 2020 tax information. So as you see from that, it's always 2 years ahead of the application. Now, if you're able to use a data retrieval tool, there are specific items that will transfer over and questions on the FAFSA you need to fill out when it comes to the tax information. So information such as the adjusted gross income on your tax return, any income tax paid, untaxed IRA distributions and pensions, education credits, IRA deductions, tax exempt interest. Also, you will enter your wages from work. Now, young students, who are going into college, usually most of the time they don't file taxes, but they may have a summer job at some point. Like I know I started working when I was 14, and I'm still not a day over 29. Yeah, that's definitely a joke here. But I know when I was going through college, my first FAFSA, I had earned income from a previous year. So I just had to enter that I didn't file a tax return, but I did earn wages. And parents, more than likely, you're providing most of the financial support for your soon-to-be student. So you probably have filed a 1040. So you would enter that you did file a 1040 and transmit your data from the IRS to the FAFSA, or enter the information manually. So if you are married, total income from work from the tax form will appear on the screen, and it will need to be separated by the student or the parent for the entry into the what we call the FOTW, so it's FAFSA on the web field. So what that means is, parents, if you file taxes married filing jointly, and you said, hey, we had $1,000 in wages, when you file the FAFSA, it will give you two options: parent one, parent two. And if you are a married couple, and $50,000 was parent one and $50,000 was parent two, you would put them in the respective spot. But say you're a parent who is not married. You are, maybe divorced, or maybe you're single, or you were married, or maybe not married, or maybe widowed, and you transmit the data over there. It will say, are you parent one? How much of this is your wages? Usually if it's single, that question won't populate, because they'll just see your marital status is single, and your tax filing status is maybe had a household or single. So usually we'll automatically transmit that data over to the wages field after it transmits everything over. And if you have questions on filing the FAFSA, there also is the Federal Student Aid Information Center. They will actually work with you step by step on filing your FAFSA. Now, IRS data retrieval tool tips. This is really important because we notice that a lot of families have issues at transmitting data, and it's usually because of really simple misinformation. So make sure the social security number, the name, and the address that's on your taxes matches what you use at the IRS, and it also matches what's on your social security card and birth certificate. Now, some parents will come forward and say, you know what, I'm not a U.S. citizen, or I'm undocumented, or I'm an immigrant. There's different things. So I don't have a social. That's okay, because you will file with the IRS to get a TIN number, and that or PTIN number, and you will then use that in place of the social. And a lot of times what will happen is, if you're undocumented, or even if you're, a permanent resident, you have an alien registration number, you just don't have a social security number, there are ways that the FAFSA will help you fill out that information so they can identify who you are. And we're going to go over that, stuff about undocumented students and parents in a little bit. But as I said, it's always good to have your documentation on hand. And also, students who have an alien registration number, make sure you enter your exact alien registration number on the FAFSA. Because when you're filing and you're an eligible non-citizen and you have that registration number, you want to make sure that that number is matching up with what the Department of Homeland Security has. Now, a lot of times families would come back and say, I'm really afraid to because, I'm undocumented, or there's a certain situation. Don't be afraid to put that information. The FAFSA is not here to send anybody after you, or they're not sending ICE to your house or police to your house or anything. The FAFSA is very keen. This is just helping you to see what aid eligibility you have. So do not worry. And if you do have a worry, contact our office. We're happy to talk to you, and we're here for you. This is your education. This is your student's education. A tricky part about the IRS data retrieval tool is the actual address. So a lot of times families will put, street with a period, but they actually meant to put street with, STREET or just the ST. So you want to make sure you're inputting the information exactly as it's on your tax return. Also, you may enter third, 3 with the RD, and it doesn't match that you put 3 or third and spelled it out. So also with the PO box or apartment number, if it's entered on the tax form in the correct spot, it will be entered on the IRS data retrieval tool in the same spot. It should not cause a problem. So this is just an example. So this family, their address is 123 Main Street, apartment number 2D. And I hope you can all see this, that they have a comma and they put apartment number 2D, there's spaces in between, but they put the 2D in the street line. They didn't put the apartment number in the apartment line. So the retrieval tool, it wouldn't work because they were trying to match up on the bottom where it said, see, apartment number or the street address. So then what they did was they entered it exactly as it's on the tax return, and then they were finally able to use it. So we always recommend put numbers where numbers are supposed to go. Put names where names are supposed to go, and put the correct social. You can use a PO box. If you have a PO box address, that's totally fine. As long as that PO box is what you put on your tax return, you'll be able to use that data retrieval tool. Now, there are some parents who, no matter what they do, and students, no matter what they do, they will not be able to use a data retrieval tool. These are just some examples. So a married couple who maybe filed a separate tax return. You're still married, you're marking your taxes as married filing separately. I do need to premise that financial aid officers, administrators, we are not tax preparers. So we cannot help you file your taxes, but we are required by federal student aid to know the minimum baseline of tax information. So we make a lot of references to Publication 17 from the IRS. That is all public knowledge, and you can go in when you file your taxes and look at Publication 17 IRS for the tax year you're filing, and you'll see where we get our data from. Married couples who filed separate tax returns will not be able to use the data retrieval tool. Also, if a student has legal parents who are unmarried and living together, there's situations like that where parents aren't married. A parent would, file one tax return, another parent would file another tax return. You put on the FAFSA you're unmarried but you're living together. Because there's two separate entities and it's not joined together by the IRS definition of marriage, you wouldn't be able to transmit the data. Also, if you file in Puerto Rico or did a foreign tax return, you would not be able to use a data retrieval tool. However, for those who maybe file a foreign tax return, you are required to report that income on the FAFSA in order for us to determine aid eligibility. So if you have, I have in Uruguay or someone in France, they filed a tax return there, you would just have to make a best estimate as to what the translation from, I think France is francs. I apologize if it's not the correct thing, but into US dollars. And there are a lot of websites out there that will help you do the translation of dollar to whatever your country's currency is. Also, applicants whose marital status changed after January 1st of the processing year. So if you maybe, filed, married filing jointly, but then on January 1, you were divorce separated and you changed that, you wouldn't be able to transmit the data because it's now saying that you're putting on the FAFSA that you're single or divorce separated or widowed, but yet your taxes are married filing jointly. Sometimes it does work, and we'll talk about that a little bit more when we're talking about marital statuses, where it's really aimed for those that are a lot of times single, head of household, married filing jointly, anything that kind of seems like a one-off with the application or your taxes, usually are the ones that have issues with transmitting the data. But it's okay if you can't use a data retrieval tool, you just want to enter the tax information as it appears on your 1040. Now, there are times in which you're filing with FAFSA, you're helping a student, a friend, or anything, and they may be deemed independent. So if the student by FSA, and FSA is the acronym for Federal Student Aid, they're the main entity for Federal Student Aid, the FAFSA, and they work hand in hand. They're a department with the Department of Education. They set all the rules, and all the rules are put out by governance and law. So the schools don't make the decisions when it comes to federal aid and filing a FAFSA. We take orders from the Department of Education and Federal Student Aid. So there are times in which a student may be deemed independent. And these are some examples. So say a student is at least 24 by December 31st of the award year covered by the FAFSA. So for example, say a student starting next year, fall of 2021, which the academic year is fall 2021 and spring 2022. If your student will be the age of 24 by December 31st of 2021, they would be considered an independent student, because any student over the age of 24 by FAFSA guidelines is considered independent. Now, a lot of families will come back and say, oh, my child's 18, they file they do their own taxes, they have their own job, we don't claim them. That doesn't matter. If a student is under the age of 24 and doesn't meet any of the criteria to meet the independent status, you would still be considered a dependent student, and the parent would be required to put their tax information on there. Even if some entities like health insurance, your student could be considered independent to the age of 26. If they're under the age of 24 by federal guidance, you would still be treated as an independent student. Or if you're a graduate or professional student, meaning if you're going for your master's degree or a doctoral degree, or say your student is married. This means a legal marriage, not just a cultural marriage. It has to be legally recognized by your state. Um, I know there are a lot of states out there, some recognize common law, some do not. It really depends on your state entity. So if you're looking to go to a school that is out of state and culturally you're considered married by common law marriage or anything like that, you want to check with your state entity and then check with that financial aid office. I know for us in New York, if you are married, it has to be legal marriage and there has to be a certificate with it. If your student has dependents other than a spouse who receives more than one half of their support from the student during the school year. So what that means is, and it does happen, in which a younger student may have a child, and that student is providing more than 50% of that child's support, throughout, and will be providing more than 50% of the support throughout that academic year, then they could be considered independent. Now, maybe a young child has a child, but their parents are providing more than 50% of the child support, and the student's not. The student's maybe not working. Then the student wouldn't be considered independent because the parents are taking care of that child, but you would still calculate as the household size everyone who's in there. So student, the student's child, and the parents. Anytime since turning 13, the student was or is an orphan in foster care or ward of the court, they would be considered, an independent student. If they were adopted prior to the age of 13, then the adopted parents would have to put their tax information on the FAFSA. On active duty, or if they're a veteran of the U.S. Armed Forces. Now, this tends to be a little bit of a hot topic because they have to be called to active duty by the president. So if they're called to active duty, then we can consider them independent. But if they were just on duty for training purposes, then they would not be independent. But if they are a veteran of the U.S. Armed Forces, we would consider them independent for federal aid purposes. Emancipated minor or in legal guardianship as determined by a court, by someone other than a parent, not in New York State. What that means is if you're in legal guardianship, if the court has given someone else legal guardianship, other than a parent, or maybe the person's not in New York State, they have legal guardianship with you, you could be considered in court order legal guardianship. The emancipated minor is someone who is basically sued for their freedom. That's the easiest way to do it. So you can go to a courthouse and you can say, I want to emancipate myself from my parents. They'll give you a form and say, okay, you're emancipated. That does not work for Title IV or federal financial aid purposes. You have to physically basically sue your family, go through court system, and the court and the judge has to decide that you are legally emancipated. And then we can, using the court documentation, we can deem you as an independent student. Now, legal guardianship. Your parent is basically considered your legal guardian, but that does not mean that you're in legal guardianship. So legal guardianship means that the guardianship was granted to somebody else by court order. So that means, and there is a difference between custody and legal guardianship. Because there's a situation in which someone else has custody, maybe an aunt or an uncle or a sibling. The court will say, we're giving custody to somebody else. Custody is not the same as legal guardianship, but if the court has ordered in that custody that this person has 100% entitlement of this child that they're watching, and they're covering everything from school expenses, living expenses, health, and they are making 100% decisions for this child, then we can look at that form of custody as a form of guardianship. But like I said, legal guardianship is mostly through the court in which they've given someone complete and total guardianship of that student. Also, if you're considered an unaccompanied homeless youth as documented by your high school, your district homeless liaison, an authorized shelter, or a financial aid administrator interview. So there are times in which, a student may have been in a situation in which their parents have disappeared. Maybe sometimes it happens where parents say, you know what, you're 18, you're on your own, and they never hear from the student again, and the student does live in a shelter, or there's a physical situation of abuse or anything like that. You can actually provide documentation to show that you meet one of the criterias. Here, we might be able to do a dependency override and not look at your parents' information, or if you're a homeless youth, you would get documentation from your liaison saying that you are in a shelter or you're in and out of various homes in order to survive and go to school. We can look at you as a independent student. Now, as I referenced a bunch of times in this email, there is the Federal Student Aid Information Center. Please take a screenshot of this screen. You can use your phone, you can use whatever you want. This is being recorded, so please, this is a great website. You want to make sure you have this number on speed dial. So this is the Federal Student Aid Information Center, or the FSAIC. They will help you through the entire process of filing your free application for federal student aid. They will help you with your ID. They will help you with obtaining your aid history, loan history, reporting information on the FAFSA. They have a live chat, email, phone number, and the phone number is working. You can call up and they will work with you step by step by step. I do know there was some questions earlier about child support. If you do receive child support or you pay child support, that does need to be filed on the FAFSA. And we'll go over that more in detail a little bit later, but that is one of the questions on the FAFSA. Also, you have to enter things like your assets, like if you have farm or business income, or you have to enter what's in your cash and savings. So there are various questions on the FAFSA that you have to ask. The SUNY Orange Financial Aid Office does have financial aid workshops, which we will help you as much as we can. But there is a SUNY FA Day, which the information is being updated on our website, which is the 14th of this month, which you will actually have a very large presentation with a number of families around the world, actually going through kind of page by page of a FAFSA. But if you don't want to attend that job, you can contact the Federal Student Aid Information Center. Also know that the application is free. The name's in the title. It's the free application for federal student aid. If someone is charging you to file your FAFSA, more than likely it's a scam. But there are offices out there that will help you and businesses that will help you for a fee. Why do that when you can go to the Federal Student Aid Information Center and they'll help you for free? Now, once you have filed your FAFSA, you will get what is called the Student Aid Report. And the Student Aid Report has this wonderful little number called the EFC, or the Expected Family Contribution. This is not your bill, and this is not your financial aid award. So your EFC is just an index number that the college financial aid staff uses to determine how much aid we can award you. The information you report on the FAFSA is used in a formula, and it's a secret formula that's behind the scenes with the Department of Education, and it's different for everyone. You know, you may have the same amount of income, or someone may say to you, I make $100,000 a year, and then someone else says, oh, I make $100,000 a year, but one gets an EFC of 0 and one gets an EFC of 10,000. Every case is individualized. You don't know everyone's full story, so don't compare apples to apples, because you have apples, oranges, pears, and maybe a pineapple. So everyone's case is different. So the EFC is calculated according to a formula that is established by law. We have no say in the formula except when we're calculating aid eligibility. They look at untaxed income, assets, benefits that you may receive, like unemployment or Social Security benefits. Some Social Security is reported, some is not. A lot of things are considered in that formula. We also consider the family size and how many students are in college. So, for example, maybe you and your your mom and dad live in a household. So there's 3 of you. So I would report on the FAFSA that there's 3 in the household, and I'm the student going to college, so there would be 3 in the household, 1 in college. Now, what if you have a younger sibling that lives in the household that's going to NFA? Well, guess what? You would say there's 4 in the household, but you're the only one in college, so you would report yourself. You also, on the FAFSA, will want to, when we're looking at the family size and the number in college, want to look at the language specifically, because it asks from this time to this time, who will be in the household, who the family will providing more than 50% of their support, and then who would be enrolled in college. And if you have an older sibling, maybe the age of 26, maybe in grad school, that they can be considered in the household size depending on the situation. I know now with COVID-19 going on, a lot of students have opted to stay home, and parents, they are still working, but their student may be a graduate student, but the parents are still providing more than 50% of their support. They can be included in the household size. So again, if you have questions, contact the Federal Student Aid Information Center. They'll be happy to explain everything in detail, or we invite you to contact your school that you're applying to for financial assistance. So hopefully I see all of you at SUNY Orange, and if you have questions, contact us. We'll be happy to have a conversation with you. Now, students are notified of the FAFSA processing, usually in most cases by email. So you want to make sure you use the accurate email on your FAFSA. And parents, I ask you 100%, I want you involved with your student's education and their financial aid, but please allow your student to navigate through the process. They need to be involved. Remember, this is their college education, and if they're borrowing loans, they have to pay that back, sometimes with interest. So you want to make sure they're involved and they know the rules and the regulations. So if you're putting an email on the FAFSA, make sure you use an email for the student, and parents, you'll enter your email as well. But the student will get the student aid report via email online. If you were able to successfully submit the FAFSA, usually in about 1 to 2 days, you'll get an email with your student aid report. If you have to, for some reason, if you can't electronically, file your FAFSA, you can print it, sign it, and then mail it off to the processing center. That could take, at minimum, I'm going to say at minimum, 2 weeks for it to be processed. It can take up to 7 weeks for it to be processed. It really just depends on the processing time and the time of year. That's why we always say file early. make sure you add, so when you get the report, it's going to say, this is the federal email address that you should be getting a student aid report from. Make sure you add that to your OK list so it doesn't go to spam. And also, you can go into the FAFSA after you've submitted it and check the status of it by using your FSAID to go in and view the student aid report or SAR. And please, 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 if you do a FAFSA, if you have to go in and submit a correction to an error you made, or you're printing off the student aid report and signing it in, or anything like that, please make sure you physically sign your FAFSA or electronically sign it. Because if you don't, it won't get processed. There are a lot of times where students will go in and make a correction. They'll add our school code, but they won't sign it, or they won't submit it. Or they'll say, oh, I went in and filed my FAFSA, and then I'll come back and say, well, I don't have it. And they'll argue with me back and forth going, I did it, I know I did it. And then I'll go into the federal sites and say, you never put our school code on there. And then they'll go and put the school code, but then they'll forget to submit it. It happens all the time. And trust me, we don't get bothered by it. We just say, hey, enter the school code and you'll be good. Now, there's something called federal verification, and this is a random selection by the Department of Education and Federal Student Aid. There is really no rhyme or reason. It is just a random selection in which it requires the institution to verify some of the accuracy of the information that was entered on the data by the parent and the student. Like I said, it's a random selection by the Department of Education and Federal Student Aid. You didn't do anything wrong. The biggest complaint about verification is that we ask for too much information, and that unfortunately schools have to comply in order for us to disperse your aid if you're selected. And it's really very simple. We look at things like the tax data, the household size, the number in college, any untaxed income. It's really just a checks and balances to make sure you're entering the data correctly. And if you don't enter correctly, the school will get the documentation. We will make the corrections on your behalf, send it off to processing, and then we'll regenerate your financial aid package based off of the new ESC. Also, a key thing, all conflicting information must be resolved. Now, what does that exactly mean? So, a student submits their FAFSA, and they put on the FAFSA that they didn't file, and they had $5,000 in wages. Okay, dependent student, $5,000 is under the threshold. They didn't need to file, so really no big deal. But then they were, in a conversation with the financial aid office, or they said, hey, I think I maybe, there's something going on. The numbers don't look right. They bring their taxes with them for some reason, or their W-2s. And they give me a W-2, and this student gave me a W-2 that said I made $50,000. Well, God bless him for a young student making $50,000 a year, but that's conflicting. It's now you put $5,000, you made $50,000. We have to resolve that. We have to find out what's going on. Other ways of conflicting information, what we see is the marital status versus the tax filing status. A lot of times we'll see parents who are married, they'll use the head of household status on the taxes. So mom and dad are married, living in the same household. They have two children. One parent will say head of household and claim one child. Another parent will say head of household and claim another. Although they may not have been selected for verification, we found out that they're married, and then we look at their tax information and it says head of household. That's considered conflicting information that would have to be resolved before we can go forward. So parent would have to maybe amend their tax return and then provide documentation to our office. We are not here to hurt you. We are not here to dig into a lot of the personals. We just have to do our due diligence as financial aid administrators to make sure we're awarding you the most accurate aid and we're being fair and equitable across the board, across the United States. So a lot of times you'll see information that's conflicting. We have to resolve it. Again, with the federal verification, if you're unable to use the IRS data retrieval tool, we will request a copy of a signed copy of your tax return, or maybe even the IRS tax return transcript. You can get your IRS tax return transcript by following this link. You can order it by mail. It sometimes takes a while, or you can call the phone number and put in a request for it. I recommend going to the IRS website and getting the transcript if you're selected for verification. It just has all the data we need. Or if you can't get it, you would just need to submit a signed copy of your tax return, and along with any other worksheets that the school requires. We will let the student know what is required. Like at SUNY Orange, we use the banner system, and the banner system has a portal portion for the student. And in that portal, a student will have the financial aid section, and it will list out all the requirements that we still need to rectify that account. And everything must be completed prior to any aid being dispersed. Sometimes you'll also get information that we may need to verify. Maybe I need a copy of your social security card or your birth certificate. Or maybe the Department of Homeland Security is not finding your social and name in the system, and they want us to verify your citizenship status. We may need to get like a passport or your certificate of naturalization. We will list all those requirements in the requirements screen. So for verification, we would do the same thing as well. Now, I did mention a number of times that the tax information that is used on your FAFSA is from 2 years prior. A lot of times, the income's okay, or maybe something changed slightly, or a lot of times there's a big jump, especially now with COVID-19 going on, families working from home, businesses closing. We sympathize and empathize with you, and we know the struggle that goes on when it comes to raising a family and income. So your EFC is based on income from prior year tax data. So as I said earlier, 2 years prior. But what happens if something happened in we'll say now, this academic year, 2021, we're looking at 2018. But say in 2019 something happened, a circumstance beyond your control happened, and the income dropped. And now in 2020, during COVID-19, your income completely was wiped out. We can use what's called professional judgment and professional discretion to change the information on the FAFSA. So you would need to present us with documentation that's supporting that special circumstance. Example, unemployment, or maybe a parent passed away, or something happened, like there was a loss of income somewhere, or even an uptick in income. Something happened. You want to contact our office, and we'll work with you on that. They're performed as corrections by the financial aid office. We say if you had something that happened after you submitted your FAFSA, all that tax data, you want to let us look at it first. You don't just want to go in and change it, because sometimes that opens up other cans of worms. So you want to just have an open dialogue with us so we can determine what aid eligibility you may be eligible for and what tax information we're going to use on the FAFSA. Common examples include unemployment or maybe even underemployment. I hate to say this, but death, divorce, military service, natural disasters, high medical expenses, nursing home expenses, or even looking at a dependency override. Unusually high medical expenses, there is an allotment in the federal formula for medical expenses, and everything it kind of tweaks the numbers a little bit during each application. But you actually, if you have more than that percent, usually between 7 and 11% is about an average for people, but some of them have 50%, especially now with COVID and hospital bills. And I've seen cases where they have close to $1 million in bills. We can take that into consideration. You just have to be able to document those bills. And if you have any questions, financial administrators, we're here for you. Don't be afraid or embarrassed. I have heard it all, from birth to death, from tomb to womb. I've heard it all, and I'm here to work with you as best that I can to help get you the best financial aid package that you would be eligible for. But never be embarrassed to have that open dialogue with us, because what stays in our office, what stays in the office, and I will work with you the best that I can. We talked about a dependency override. Dependency override gives the administrator authority to allow, in other words, dependent student to be treated as an independent student. Situations such as like if there's parental abuse or abandonment, if your parents are incarcerated and you have no contact with them, even if you have, this also becomes a hot topic when it comes to family, because maybe one parent is incarcerated. We are still required to collect information regarding that parent, but a lot of times, maybe someone's incarcerated in another state, or they have no contact with that person, but yet, in 2018 or 19, they filed the taxes and then they're incarcerated. We would look at that and use our own professional discretion to say we're not going to include that person or not. Parents in another country, just because you're 18 living on your own, or you're like, oh, my parents don't claim me, you still would need to provide that information. But if you can prove that the parents are not in your life and you have supporting documentation, especially from someone from a disinterested third party, such as like a priest or a school counselor, a government or a religious affiliation, as long as you can provide documentation to prove the situation and that you are being self-supporting, we could always look at a dependency override. And if we have any questions, we'll ask for more documentation. And yes, please, before you do anything on the FAFSA after you submit it, contact us and we can tell you if it needs to be a correction by our office or it needs to be just an update by you on your application. Now, after we've gone over all of that, a lot of information, I know, and it's overwhelming. We're going to talk about now the nitty gritty. This should go a little faster. So when you when you start hearing about the cost of college, you hear one main word that's part of, the biggest thing of college is the cost of attendance. How much is it going to cost me to go to school? And that varies from person to person to person. Everyone's EFC is different. Everyone's cost may be slightly different. But the cost of attendance at any school is broken down into two categories: your billable costs and your indirect costs or your non-billable costs, okay? Billable costs are what is going to be charged to you on your student bill. This includes tuition and fees, or if you're living on campus room and board, maybe you have a campus fee or you're taking a lab course, a biology course, and there's a lab fee. These will show up on your college bill. But then the opposite of that is indirect costs. These are costs that you will not be charged, but you can utilize aid eligibility to help cover those costs. For example, books and supplies, off-campus room and board, personal expenses or travel costs. Say you can't live on campus and off campus, so you may just be billed tuition and fees as your direct cost if you live at home or live off campus. But if you have enough aid to give you what's called a refund, then you can use that money to help cover your off-campus expenses. A lot of schools do book vouchers, where if you have excess aid that would generate a refund, they will allow you, before they release that refund to you, to use a portion of that to get your books and supplies to the bookstore. Here at SUNY Orange, we do that. So if I know a student has $1,000 refund coming back and they need to get books from the bookstores that are going to equal 500, they'll put the voucher open for the bookstore and they could say, go in, order your books, and they'll put the charge on your bill, and then your money from your refund will go to pay that bill, and then you'll get the difference. But remember, indirect costs do not show up on your bill. Now, the financial aid package is broken up into various aspects. In general, need-based financial aid, so we're talking grants, scholarship, a subsidized loan, which we'll go over in a little bit, is all considered need-based. So how to determine a gross need would be you take your school's cost of attendance, subtract your EFC from your FAFSA, and that will be your gross need. So what we try to do is all need-based aid, grants, scholarships, subsidized loan, anything like that, we try to fill that need as much as we can. Also, for those of you who may be eligible for the federal Pell Grant, we look at your EFC because there is a chart we follow to see what aid eligibility you have with the Pell Grant based off of your EFC. After your need is met, we try to we fill your cost of attendance. So, for example, say you have a cost of attendance of $10,000, but you have an EFC from the FAFSA of 0. So that means $10,000 minus 0 is $10,000. So I will do everything in my power to try to give you need-based aid up to $10,000. But say you're only eligible based on some factors up to $5,000. So that means I can give you $5,000 in need-based items, and then the other $5,000 up to that 10 cost of attendance would be non-need-based aid, as like an unsubsidized loan or a Parent Plus loan. I know it sounds a little confusing, but it's really kind of simple to follow once you go through it the first time. Remaining need after grants and scholarships are typically covered by work study or loans. Some forms of financial aid can replace all or a portion of the expected family contribution. So, for example, if you have a cost of attendance of $10,000, and say you have an EFC of $10,000, that means you have 0 gross need, but you can use the unsubsidized loan to cover that $10,000 family contribution. You can use certain private loans to fill that gap, even scholarships. Here at SUNY Orange, we do have work-study jobs. Work-study jobs, a lot of times, are on campus. Unfortunately, due to COVID-19 this year, a lot of them have been canceled. But for future, we do have jobs on campus. The award is part of your financial aid package, but it doesn't go towards your bill. You actually get a little paycheck. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. Now, various sources of financial aid. So there's pretty much 4 categories that are broken down in the financial aid world. You start with grants, scholarships, work study, and loans. Okay, so we're gonna touch base very quickly on each one of those. So first and foremost, grants. Grants are basically, in other words, free money. We don't like the term free money because, it just doesn't sound right. So we say grants. Grants are things such as the federal Pell Grant or the federal Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant, or even state grants. If you're a New York State resident, New York State TAP, the Tuition Assistance Program, or even the Excelsior Scholarship. Those are all form of grants and scholarships. Even institutional grants. At SUNY Orange, we do have our foundational scholarships. I know at the University of Pennsylvania, they have a Penn Grant. Worked at that school before too. So they have Penn Grants. So various schools have various institutional grants and scholarships that they offer. And a lot of that will be determined on your FAFSA, and will also be determined on your gross need, also maybe what's left over. But a lot of times they look at merit as well. So this brings us to scholarships. Various scholarships, such as athletic scholarships, academic and leadership, theater and music. I was a theater major in college, and I'm actually a trained hair and makeup designer. Why I have hair all around me. And I had a theater scholarship for technical theater. A lot of times these scholarships are usually competitive, sometimes very competitive. They could be at various levels, an institutional level, national, state, local, or civic level. Check with the financial aid office, check with our financial aid office. Once the application process opens for our new class coming in the fall, that's when our scholarship application will open at SUNY Orange. So I believe it should be soon. I think it's in January when it opens up. So once you want to apply. And the worst thing that happens is you're not eligible, understandable, but then you come to school and you maybe have a really high GPA, you're doing everything right, you're involved in not only the academic portion, but even the non-academic portion, like clubs and everything. They may say, hey, this student's a great scholar. We're going to give this student a scholarship based on having a 4.0 GPA. There are some students who are, presidential scholarships who get 100% everything covered. So you definitely want to check our website for that information. Now, like I said, SUNYOrange.edu under admissions and then scholarships for entering freshmen. A lot of incoming scholarships are meant towards the freshman class coming in, but we do have other campus-based scholarships that are out there through the foundation that are, for someone who's here, because we're Orange County Community College, we're a 2-year school. So after someone's first semester, they may do really well, contact their foundation and apply. We may actually have a scholarship for you. Also, New York State. If you are a New York State resident, you want to make sure you're also doing your New York State TAP application. And if you're not eligible for TAP, then you may be eligible for the Excelsior Scholarship. But HESC.NY.GOV is a website where you're going to get a lot of information regarding state grants and state scholarships for New York State residents. So, for example, you've all heard the Excelsior Scholarship for those students attending a SUNY school who may not be eligible for New York State TAP, or maybe a reduced amount. They can kind of swap out a portion of that with the Excelsior Scholarship. But if you go right on that website, the HESC.NY.GOV, it will give you all the information and criteria for those grants and scholarships. Institutional scholarships. First things first, parents, check with your employer. See if they offer any sort of, go to human resources, see if they offer any, scholarships. Guidance counselors, career counselors, college counselors, reach out to your students reach out to them. And a lot of times high schools will have a scholarship binder, which has a list of scholarships that you can apply for. Sometimes you don't even need to apply for them. They just, they award you based on your academics. I know, like Dollars for Scholars. When I was in high school, I was in National Honor Society. I'm not gloating. I'm just saying, things I received, and I didn't apply for them. I was just part of the group that gave those scholarships, and I was selected to receive those. So you want to check. Also, free websites, the College Board website, Scholarship America. I know they've changed their website a little bit. FastWeb is a big website for a lot of places and a lot of scholarships. I always say a key to a scholarship is be prepared to write. A lot of times we'll be writing criteria for you to do an essay or something, and be prepared to write and leave no stone unturned. You want to make sure you find every single opportunity to get grants and scholarships for your education so you're not taking loans. Also, if you are asked to pay for a scholarship application, a lot of times it's a scam. So should not have to pay for a scholarship application. Also, if you receive a private scholarship, say from your school, and it's made out to you directly, you are required by the Department of Education to report that to us because it's considered what's called a resource. So say, or maybe your parents' job wrote you a check for $10,000 to use towards college, and you decide to cash it. Although you may have used it for expenses, you need to report that to us that you received it because the government does say it is a resource, and we do have to adjust aid eligibility. If you don't report it, and then we award financial aid your financial aid package, and we pay it out, and then we find out later you had that scholarship, we are mandated to have to return aid eligibility to incorporate that resource. So be upfront, be honest, just let us know, and it'll go quick as anything. SUNY Orange, like I said, we offer work study, as a lot of schools do participate in the federal work study program. This is based on your need. So remember that little formula, cost of attendance minus EFC equals your need. We will look at your need. You also want to make sure on the FAFSA you select yes to the work study question. Some schools offer everyone work study. Some schools, like SUNY Orange, we do have limited funding. So the earlier you file and you select yes, the better opportunity you have to be selected. So you want to make sure you're putting yes on the application, your free application for federal student aid, and make sure that we're going to look at your need and file the work study application with our office. We do provide an on-campus job, so you're not having to drive 10 miles down the road or walk to a job. Nope, usually it's in an office. You work about 10 to 15 hours per week, and the funds are paid directly to the student. Now, usually the jobs are generally above minimum wage, and what you earn will not affect future aid down the line. However, please note that federal work study, so I'll talk about two separate factors here. Federal work study is part of the financial aid award package. So if you are awarded, you have a financial aid package of $10,000, but you're awarded work study, just say for $5,000. Now I know $5,000 will go towards my bill in financial aid, but that $5,000 I have to earn, and I'll get a paycheck for that. A lot of families go, well, why is my work study showing on my bill? Well, work study is not a fund that is paid to your bill. It's paid directly to the student. They earn that like a regular job. But if you want to take that money you get and pay it towards your bill, sometimes the student accounts office will work with you. But a lot of times we say use that for your educational expenses. For those students who maybe have excess aid and they get a refund, those refunds are meant for your educational expenses. Do not go out and buy a car or take a trip to Miami or, right now with COVID, you can't sit at home. So if you're like me, don't buy wigs, or maybe buy them. But if you have like books and rent and internet you need, or maybe you need a camera for a photography class, those are educational expenses. So at our school, we have federal and local work study. Undergraduate students are eligible because we are just an undergraduate 2-year program. Employment may be on or off campus, and they're great resume builders. I was a work study all through my undergrad. I'm proud to say I went to SUNY Oneonta. I'm a proud Red Dragon, and I'm also a Bearcat from Cincinnati because I went to the University of Cincinnati College Conservatory of Music, and I had work study through both programs and love it. And it's actually a lot of jobs I talked to have even asked, oh, were you, did you do a work study job, everything like that? It's a great resume builder. There are opportunities to work during the summer. Wages won't count against the student's future financial aid eligibility on the FAFSA, and you want to make sure you respond yes. And if you have questions, ask. Please feel free to ask. Now, what everyone always afraid of are loans. Loans are not scary. So again, don't wig out. Loans are not scary. It's just a matter of knowing how to borrow wisely and only borrow what you need to get you through school. And if you have a way to not, to fund your education without taking out a loan, please do it. A lot of times students will work while they're in school. Parents will say, listen, we have a fund put aside for you. We don't want you to take out loans. Because remember, the more you borrow, the more you have to pay back. And you don't want to do that. So with the federal direct loan program, there's two types of loans for a student, an unsubsidized loan and a subsidized loan. The easiest way to tell the difference, and everyone always gets a kick out of it when I say this, when I eat a sub, I'm usually very happy. I love food. So sub, happy, subsidized, that is not accruing interest while you're in school. The government's actually paying that interest while you're in school. You will not start gaining interest until after you graduate or fall below half time or you withdraw and you go into your repayment. So sub, happy, not accruing interest while you're in school. But the opposite of happy is sad or unhappy. So think of unsub, unhappy. That one is accruing interest while you're in school. So sub, happy, not accruing interest. Unsub, unhappy. That one accrues interest while you're in school. Now, sometimes you do need additional loan funding in order to pay your bill. So parents, you may need to take out a Parent Plus loan, which is a loan taken out by the parent for the student. It is a credit-based loan. So if you are approved, that is your loan. It's used to pay your student's bill, but you are responsible for that. A lot of times parents will say, oh, we're going to take out the Parent Plus loan, but the student has signed an agreement with me to pay that back once they graduate. That's fine. That's out of our hands. But if you need to supplement, you could apply for a Parent Plus loan. Also, private alternative loans with an outside company. Schools cannot make specific recommendations. A lot of the open SUNY schools do not have preferred lender lists. We're not allowed to, but we will say go to your favorite search engine, type in loans for college. Hundreds of companies will come up. Historically, you'll hear names such as like Sallie Mae, Wells Fargo, Discover, maybe your local bank. You can apply for those, usually based on credit, and a student may need a cosigner, but you can use that to replace any of the federal loans or replace that EFC that we were talking about earlier. So as I was going over the federal student loan, the difference, the federal government pays the interest for the direct subsidized loan while the student's in school, where unsub, unhappy, is accruing interest once it's first dispersed. Both loans have what's called an origination fee. That is just like a fee they keep out of each loan disbursement. It's usually a little over 1%. And if you go to SUNY.ED.GOV, there is a whole section on understanding aid and a whole section on loan eligibility. Check that out. It's fantastic. And I'll actually put that up at the end of the presentation so you can see what I'm referencing. And again, we look at your EFC to determine if you're eligible for subsidized, because that's a need-based loan, or unsubsidized, which is non-need based. And again, you borrow a gross amount, and then there's a loan fee kept out of each disbursement. So then the net pays to your account. So think of wages and taxes. You earn your wages, so you earn your gross pay. The government takes taxes out. You take home net. Same with the loan. You borrow gross. They keep the origination fee. Net goes towards your student bill. And Parent Plus loans, again, it's a credit-based loan, and you would have to do an application. And if you follow that little link where it says SUNY.ED.GOV, understand aid, type loan interest rates, you'll actually get what the current interest rates are, also what loan fees are. Right now, a lot of the loan interest rates are on hold due to COVID-19. That probably will change. We're doing all we can to kind of help students out. But as we fix COVID, is the best way you could say it. Some interest rates have plummeted. So the government's doing what they can to help the students out. Now, the last most important thing you always want to remember is when you're at school, and every school has their own satisfactory academic progress policy, you must maintain a positive academic progress while you're in school, or satisfactory academic progress. SUNY Orange's policy is right there on that link. So you are required while you're in school to complete 67% of your attempted credits. So what does that mean? That means if I'm taking a course that is, or I'm taking several courses that are, say 15 credits, or we'll make it even easier for you. We'll say 12 credits. If you take that 12 credits and multiply it by 67%, you're going to get a total of 8.04. And yes, even though I work in financial aid, I do numbers all day. I use a calculator just to make sure I'm accurate. So I need to earn, out of those 12 credits, I need to pass at minimum more than 8. So 8 or more in order to maintain academic progress. So what it looks at is your attempts versus your completion. At SUNY Orange, we do a review every year, and we make sure the student is meeting academic progress. So there's three ways we look at this: the maximum time frame, the qualitative portion, and the quantitative portion. So one of them, we look at the GPA, make sure you're maintaining a good GPA, which at SUNY Orange, if you're taking between 0 and 29.5 credits, you have to have a 1.5 GPA overall. If you go by our school standards, if you're taking more than 30, if you've completed more than 30 credits, you have to have a 2.0 GPA in order to graduate. And that follows all federal guidances as well. Um, so for example, I'll pose a question out to you guys. If someone's taking, they've taken 25 credits and they've passed 5, obviously that's uh, kind of unrealistic. That student would not be meeting academic progress. But say they did 25 and they took, and they passed successfully, we'll just say 25 and they passed 20. Make it easy. So yes, that student that's over 67% that they've completed, they would be making academic progress, and as long as their GPA is meeting the requirement, they will be good. Now, also when it comes to state aid, New York State TAP, remember we go to that HES website, you have a state portion that you have to follow as well, and that's kind of universal for New York State. So go to the HES website, you can see what their requirements are for academic progress. Uh, some schools will check their progress every semester. Some schools will check it once a year. If you lose aid eligibility, we cut you off. You do have a right to appeal in case it's a circumstance above your control, and we'll work with you on that. And every school sets their own policy. So everyone, that was a lot of information, and I know there are probably questions um, going across the board. So we ask in the Google Docs, post your questions, and I will be happy to answer them. So what do we got?
Well, first of all, everybody, you just received one of the most thorough presentations on financial aid. And I know it's going to sound and feel overwhelming, but it's a step-by-step process. Financial aid is somewhat long. Maybe Mr. Torres disagrees, but for most of us, it's not a lot of fun.
I love it.
However, it is, I figured, it is very manageable. So don't let the amount of information you just heard scare you. So now let me go through some of the questions. We have some great questions. First question, can undocumented students receive financial aid?
That is a really great question. So according to the federal guidance, undocumented students cannot receive federal aid, but they may be eligible for state aid from New York State. There is the DREAM Act, so they may receive TAP from New York State or even the Excelsior Scholarship. And a lot of schools do have funding, institutional funding for undocumented students. But unfortunately, federal aid, such as Pell or direct loans, undocumented students under DACA are not federal aid eligible.
Great, clear answer. Next wonderful question. Do you recommend that all students complete the FAFSA, even if you know you will not qualify? And I assume they're talking about a high family income level.
Absolutely. And here's why. Even at minimum, if you have a high income, the FAFSA is your application for federal aid. You may at minimum be eligible for a federal direct unsubsidized loan. So that's the minimum, unless you have borrowed your maximum aggregates. You can only borrow up to a certain amount yearly and total overall in school. But a lot of schools, even though you may not be eligible for grants or scholarships, you may need that loan to help cover your educational expenses. And a lot of schools do use your FAFSA in order to determine other aid eligibility, such as institutional merit or merit-based scholarships, or even need-based scholarships. In addition, they also may ask you to fill out the CSS profile, which is another way schools will determine aid eligibility. So yes, even if your parents make $1 million and you made $1 million, file your FAFSA. Some schools will also award you work study, even if you don't aren't eligible for federal work study, but they need your FAFSA just to determine, is it going to be a local work study or is it going to be a federal work study? So always file your FAFSA.
I'm smiling, but I'm smiling off camera because this is the same message that as school counselors we give to our students and to our families. You touched on it. Child support must be reported. Is that correct?
Absolutely. The Department of Education and Federal Student Aid looks at child support as income coming into the household, although it's not from work, it's untaxed income. So if parent one is, the main source and the main parent for the student, and they're receiving child support from parent two, you are required to report that on the FAFSA, even if it is not court ordered. But a lot of times families will say, oh, how are you going to know that? Trust me, we find out. But you are required to put that. Just also opposite of that, if you are a parent who is supporting your child who's going to college, but you're paying child support for another to another parent, you can report that as well. There are questions on the FAFSA that say, child support, what's been paid and what's been received. So if you're a parent who maybe makes $10,000, but that $10,000 being paid in child support, that will adjust your formula that we use to determine your EFC. So yes, anything untaxed income has to be reported.
Thank you. So here's another really good question. Do I have to report my spouse's income even though that spouse is not the child's biological father?
That is a great question. And yes, so if you are remarried, and that even though he's not the biological father and maybe he hasn't legally adopted that child, you are required to report both your income and the birth parent's income as well if they are remarried. Now, say you're not remarried. Say mom has a partner, not married yet, boyfriend or anything, or father has a boyfriend. It doesn't really matter the situation, but if they're not legally married, then it would just be mom and the student. You wouldn't count the spouse in there unless they're providing other types of support. But if they are legally married, then that step parent is required to be reported as part of the household size and the income.
Thank you again. This is a great list. So the next question is, I'm an undocumented person, but my child was born here. Can that child receive financial aid?
So it does depend on the student status, but if your child was born here, usually they are considered a U.S. citizen, then yes. If they're deemed a U.S. citizen, they would be eligible for aid, even if the parent is undocumented. You would just need to report your tax information on the FAFSA. Also, in addition, even though you may be undocumented here in the United States, you are still required by IRS Publication 17 and the IRS guidance to file a tax return. Don't be afraid to file a tax return because you will get, nobody's going to come after you. So that's what everyone's afraid of. But yes, the student, as long as they're considered a U.S. citizen or an eligible non-citizen, they would or could be eligible for financial aid. I do, and while I have this question on here, I did pull up, and I'm going to see if it'll allow me to move it over. I don't know if you all can see this. This is on the Student Aid website. This is a whole lot of question and answers regarding undocumented students. See, under DACA, I said that no undocumented students, including DACA, are not eligible for federal aid. There is a whole section on parent information and what it means if my parents are undocumented and then I'm a U.S. citizen based on birth. A lot of great questions. And if you don't have, if you're not sure or don't understand it, contact our office. I'm happy to go over with you and look at your situation, or even contact Federal Student Aid. They'll be happy to go over it with you.
Okay. Again, we have some stellar questions. This question says, I have a lot of savings from years ago, but do not make a lot now. Would that hurt me in getting financial aid, even though I do not make a lot of money now?
It depends. It really depends on the amount of income you're reporting under your, wages, and how much you actually have in, savings in your cash savings. So say, for example, a parent may make $30,000 a year, okay? But they inherited an inheritance of $1 million. I'm just using larger numbers to say that. Then yes, they would take that cash checking and savings and look at in the formula when adjusting your EFC. But it depends. Every case is so different. Also, a lot of times you may have a family member who had a one-time, inheritance or something. Like maybe a grandparent passed away and gave you a one-time, you know, benefit for something. We can always look at that. Like your income's 30,000, you received a one-time thing that you're never going to receive again. We could actually use professional judgment and take that out of the formula and determining your aid eligibility. So I can only answer that as it depends, because one, we would have to look at how much you have. There is a great website if you actually search it, and you can get there through student aid. But if you just, as what someone said, Google it, the FAFSA forecaster, this will ask a lot of those questions. They'll ask you those questions, and you can input the data and see how much estimatively it could be. But there's a lot of factors into it. So I can only answer that as it depends.
Excellent. Another common question that comes up is divorce. Do both parents' incomes have to be put on the FAFSA, even though only one will be paying for college?
Another situation where it depends. So if the parents are divorced and they're living in the same household, then both parents would be required, because it's based on the income of the household. So both parents would have to be on there. But if parents are divorced and they are living in separate residencies, it would be the custodial parents' information, or who's providing more than 50% support of that child, would be the one you enter on the FAFSA. So, for example, say, me, I'll say little Raymond is parents are divorced. Dad lives in Alabama and mom lives in New York, and I live with my dad, but I'm going to school in New York. My dad will be providing more than 50% of support while I'm going to school in New York, although I may stay with my mom temporarily. Because my dad is providing support, I would use his information. Or say the opposite. I'm living with mom in New York, dad lives out of state. I would just use mom's information. Now, there are also times in which parents have, and I've seen this and we've gone through it, have 50-50 custody. Like it's exactly split down to the minute of the day. And we always say the best recommendation for that is who is going to be providing, the most support, and who the student has lived with more in the year prior, or who will they be living with more. That's why there's an odd number of days in the year, 365, because usually one parent will provide even just one day more support. So then in that case, if it's 50-50 split down to the middle and everything is 50-50, we're going to look at the parent and who the student is going to very much be residing with. And sometimes it's a toss-up. Sometimes you may want to use, this parent, and then the student decides to move and live with the other parent. Then the next year you can use the other parent. So the answer really, it depends. But no, if your parents are divorced and living separately, then you do not need to report the non-custodial parent on the FAFSA. Now, the second part to that answer is, what if parents are, legally, they're still married, but legally separated. So they file taxes married filing jointly, but yet now when they file their FAFSA, dad lives at another address and mom lives, and I live with my mom. But they file taxes together. So when you enter the data, it's going to be, both their taxes together. We can use professional judgment as long as the family can prove that they are living at two separate addresses. So we would get like documentation, like a utility bill, a lease, showing that dad's living somewhere else, mom's living here. We could then remove the non-custodial parent from the formula. So like everything is on a case-by-case basis. So you definitely want to have a conversation with us.
Thank you. I think that's going to lead us towards our closing of the evening. And everybody hang out for one more moment, because on behalf of the Newburgh Enlarged City School District, I want to thank Mr. Torres and the generosity of SUNY Orange for providing the information and a wealth of resources this evening. The last question that was in the chat was a question asking if a video of this session will be available later to view. The answer to that question is yes, it will be. Give us a little bit of time to get the link on the district website. Everyone who pre-registered, we have your email, and we will email you out the information for the link. Once again, I hope you found the evening worthwhile. Don't let the amount of information overwhelm you. It is manageable. There are great professionals in the financial aid offices at the colleges across this country. Please make use of them. Wherever your student, your scholar is applying, that college has a financial aid office with trained professionals like Mr. Torres who know this form in great detail. If you listened carefully this evening, you heard a tremendous amount of detail. These professionals can answer the questions that are unique to your life and your circumstances and help you navigate the process. Once again, it's been a pleasure. I wish we could have done this in person, but I hope you found it to be a valuable evening. Thanks to all.
Thank you. Thank you very much.